Hi, this is Emma Fahler, and for my project, I picked Marie Antoinette. Here we have a very basic timeline of her life. Obviously, these are not all of the important events that occurred in her life. I just wanted to provide a very brief overview. There are a few things I do want to point out here. The first is when she was born in 1755, and she died in 1793. So the first thing I wanted to point out is how short her lifespan was. Clearly, the life expectancy in the 1700s was shorter than it is today, just due to advancements in medicine and whatnot. But she did die very, very young, in her late 30s. The second thing I wanted to point out is she was born in 1755 and married in 1770. So she was married quite young. If you look at the specific dates of November 2nd and April 19th, you'll notice she was married when she was 14. I also wanted to point out she was married in 1770 and did not have her first child until 1777. I'll touch more on that later, but I did want to point out there was a 7-year gap between when she was married and had her first child. Why is she famous? Why do we remember Marie Antoinette and recognize her name still? She was the last queen of France. She married Louis XVI, and they were the last monarchy, the last king and queen of France. She was a fashion icon. You can see from this picture, her dresses and her hairstyles were quite extravagant, and she dressed like that every day. She was all decked out in jewelry and dresses, and her hairstyles were quite crazy. I'll show you some more pictures later on and talk about that a little bit more. She has a very, very famous quote that most people will think of if you say the name Marie Antoinette. It's right here, this "let them eat cake." I'll explain that more later, but that is one of the reasons why she is so famous and people still remember her. The last reason she's so famous is she was hated by her people. This did not happen until later on in her life, but the people she oversaw spread pamphlets, rumors, criticized her, all sorts of things, which kept her name pretty famous. Marie Antoinette's young life. She was born in 1755 to Maria Theresa and Francis I. Francis I was Francis III of Lorraine, and eventually he became Francis I of the Holy Roman Empire. Her mom, Maria Theresa, was the Archduchess of Austria and the heiress of the Habsburg Empire. Her dad, Francis I, passed away when she was only 10 years old, so her mom did most of the raising of her. She was mischievous and carefree. Her schooling was not the most important thing in their lives, and it wasn't really focused on very much. So she spent a lot of her time wandering, looking. She was very curious. She explored a lot of the surrounding areas and hung around the palace most of her days. Some would say she was very absent-minded, as she didn't have a ton of schooling, and she struggled to learn how to read and write. Her life, she was part of royalty, so you could say she lived in pretty moderate luxury. She didn't have very many strict rules, but she did live under royalty and under royal rule. So they did have a little bit of money, and she lived pretty comfortably in the palace, and she had a lot of nice things. Her mom chose her spouse, Louis XVI, the heir of the French throne. She got married at 14, and she didn't meet her husband until the marriage was set. This marriage was more of a government tool to strengthen the ties of the Austro-French alliance. Her mom, Maria Theresa, hoped that by marrying off her daughter to the grandson of the French king would secure ties with the French and hopefully strengthen their alliance. The French saw Marie Antoinette as a model of beauty and personality if they could work on her just a little bit. Since she was so mischievous and carefree, She didn't live under the strict rules of the French, so they knew they were going to have a little bit of work to be done. Her married life was very interesting. She married Louis XVI of France before he was the King of France. So he was simply just the Dauphin of the throne, which meant when his grandfather passed away, he would be taking the throne. She didn't meet him until the wedding was arranged, so there wasn't a ton of true love between the two of them. It was simply a government tool for them to be married. It was a big deal for them to be married. So a 24-day-long procession took place where chariots and horses and carriages marched her into France to meet her future husband. On May 16th of 1770, she married Louis XVI in Versailles. Their wedding was celebrated hugely. There were fireworks and celebrations, and a couple of very prominent French composers performed very famous opera performances for them. Marie Antoinette was super outspoken and she was very strong, so it was odd to see Louis XVI being so shy. When the first time they met, he went with his grandfather to see Marie Antoinette, and he was very, very timid, and he kissed her very softly on the cheek, and nothing more than that. He was very shy, very soft-spoken. He was extremely smart, but he became tongue-tied often and stumbled over words and struggled to speak clearly sometimes. Marie Antoinette struggled to adapt to the etiquette expectations. She had not lived under laws as strict and high as the French laws were. She had been under royalty her whole life, but she never really experienced the strict laws and expectations the French held her to. She needed a lot of help learning how to obey expectations, follow the laws. She even needed some help dressing, as she didn't quite fit the French expectations and the French standards. She did dress very well prior to being married, but she did need some help with that. As you saw from the timeline, they were married in 1770 and didn't have their first child until 1777. And one reason for that is they couldn't consummate the marriage for 7 years. There are various rumors and assumptions about why they couldn't consummate their marriage. Some of them being Louis XVI had deformities or defective reproductive parts, and some of them went as far as they didn't know how to. They were both very, very young. You know, Marie Antoinette was married at just 14 years old, and so they weren't very wise, and so some of the rumors were they just simply did not know how to. There were a few other rumors that Marie Antoinette was sleeping with other guys since the king was unable to consummate the marriage and satisfy her. Some of those rumors were by her own people. Some of the rumors were that she was getting with the king's brothers and family members. There were also rumors that she was dominating her husband, that since Marie Antoinette was so strong and she was pretty powerful, that she would dominate her husband and step on his toes and speak over him. They saw the king as passive and believed that he was very easily manipulated by his wife. Those rumors may or may not be true, but we do know that the king was slightly afraid of women and had a hard time standing up for himself and speaking what he thought was right. Marie Antoinette was very, very strong-spoken, and she was very proud, and she knew what she wanted, and she would stand up for herself. So to see Louis XVI be quite shy and Marie Antoinette be very not shy. It isn't too far-fetched to say she did dominate her husband slightly, whether, that meant she stepped on everything he would do or shut down everything he did or said. We don't know. We just know that Marie Antoinette was very strong, and she spoke her mind quite often. Marie Antoinette also was very proud to adopt her role as a mother. She didn't have kids for the first 7 years of their marriage, so when she was able to finally have her first child, after 7 years of marriage, she was proud and very happy to adopt that role as a mother. They had 4 children together. They did have 6 children in total with 2 adopted kids, but they had 4 biological children. She was more than happy to give up the wild lifestyle of going out, some would say partying, but she did often go out and go to balls, and she lived quite extravagantly prior to having children. So she was more than happy to give up that lifestyle to be a good mother and a present mother for her children. Her oldest was Maria Theresa Charlotte, and then she had Louis Joseph next, who did pass away at only 8 years old, possibly and most probably from tuberculosis. Their next child, Louis Charles, passed away at 10, seemingly from the same thing. Both children had passed from tuberculosis, and those broke Marie Antoinette's heart. She loved her children very dearly, and so for 2 of her heirs to pass was heartbreaking for her. She did have another daughter, Sophie Beatrice, who passed away at only 11 months. She struggled to recover from the deaths of her children, and it broke her heart to see her children pass. But she loved them very, very dearly, and she was a very present mother to her children while they were alive, and she was very proud to show them off. Here are some very clear pictures of how she was so into fashion. Not everyone would agree that she was, a fashion icon. Some would say she ruined fashion, abused it, or simply used it to overpower people and show her status and power. But she did change fashion, and she was very in style and wore these crazy extravagant dresses. The French knew if she was going to be the queen, she needed to look as French as possible. There were some very distinct features that shone that she was not naturally French. Things like changing her hair to make her facial structure look more French. There were things like a large forehead that would give away she was not French. So they used hairstyles and different makeup techniques and accessories to try to hide those things. Her teeth showed she was not French. She was not French. So again, they used makeup, they used accessories, they used hats, they used hairstyles, different kind of clothing in an attempt to hide those skin features and facial features and bone structures that she was not French. Her hairdresser, Leonard Auty, he came up with some very, very crazy, extravagant, involved hairstyles, you could say. One of them, I have a very clear photo of it here, incorporated a model ship in her hairstyle in honor of the French Navy. She used clothing and hairstyles and accessories as a way to honor the French, not only look French, but honor the French. The Navy, the government, she used techniques like that to show her support and honor of the French She used her hair and her clothing as a way of showing her status and power. Some would say that's how she ruined fashion or abused fashion, but she used it to show her status. She was very proud of her hair and her clothing and her outfits. Even when she had kids, you can see in one of the pictures her children are with her. She did dial it back slightly, but she still was very proud to dress proper and look as French as she possibly could. Her clothing, her dresses, her hair, all was spectacular. Very extravagant. Some thought she overdid it quite often with her hairstyles, but she used that as a way to express herself. Every single day, she had dozens to hundreds of handmaids, hairstylists, makeup artists that would help her get ready. There was probably never a day in her life after she was queen that she did not have somebody helping her get ready and help her put on her clothing and pick out her outfits and put her shoes on and do her makeup. It was a very long and involved process. Inside Versailles, she had a small secluded village where she would dress up as a peasant, and some of her other ladies from her court and handmaids and things like that would dress up with her as well. Many people did not like that since she was dressing up as a peasant, and she used it as kind of a role play dress up act. Many thought, she was making fun of them or looking down upon them while she was doing that, where she was dressing up as a peasant inside of her very, very large palace. But you can see from the photos that even her hats, all of the details of her clothing were very particular and very well thought out. All of her jewelry, rings, necklaces, bracelets, all of that was incredibly thought out. And so many people, that is why she's famous. Many people think fashion, clothing, hair, when they think of Marie Antoinette. That's why I put that in the very first couple slides where she is so famous, because of her crazy extravagant clothing and jewelry. And she very much used that as a way to express herself. So I would not say she abused fashion or she ruined it or she used it to stomp on people. She used that to express herself. That was her way of showing people who she was and that she was proud to be French. She did take pride in the way she dressed, and from her, they call it her ship hair, which sounds funny, but her ship hair. She wore a boat in her hair to honor the French Navy. So I do think she did take pride in being French and used her clothing and looking French to show that. The trial. So this is the bulk of her life, is this trial, this downhill spiral, which eventually will lead to her death. I'm going to provide some background information so we kind of have an idea of what's going on here. So there's a few little notes to the side that just point out to focus on and remember that Marie Antoinette at heart is Austrian. That's where she came from. Her family is not French. She married into the French family. The royal family lives in Versailles, so they live in France. That's where she lives now. And at this point in history, this country is struggling economically. They are struggling with bread shortages, famine, disease, things like that are creating a very, very real struggle for peasants and putting a lot of pressure on Louis XVI and his kind of government rule as he is trying to lead the country and his people through this. And so he's bringing Marie Antoinette along with him. And the queen is also having to deal with this economic struggle and dealing with revolts and frustrated common folk. The people that are ruling were quite frustrated. Marie Antoinette lived very lavishly, and many of them thought Marie Antoinette is spending the country's money to buy these expensive outfits and pay these very high-end hairstyles and buying her jewelry instead of using the money to assist the country with a bounce back. They thought, Marie Antoinette and even Louis XVI was feeding into living lavishly, which very possibly could have been happening. Her outfits were not cheap. Her clothing was not cheap. The way she lived was not cheap. But she did dial it back once, she became a mother and the country started struggling. So this is really when a lot of her people began to hate her and start spreading rumors and start putting her under pressure. In the beginning, I did mention, one of the reasons she is famous, and we do remember her name, is because of how hated she was by the people towards the end of her life. And this is really when that starts to pick up, after the country is struggling and her people are picking at her for spending all of this money on these clothes. My first point here is her quote, "Let them eat cake." I brought up the struggle economically they were having, and part of that was these food shortages and increases in prices due to the low supply. There were marching and protesting in response to famine and the struggle to find food and the bread shortages and things. And allegedly Marie Antoinette stated, "If there's no bread, let them eat cake." And there's no actual proof, written documents, or firsthand statements or witnesses saying that she said this. It is a very alleged statement. A lot of people took this and ran with it as a way to further diminish the queen, showing, hey, she has little regard for our problems. She thinks possibly, these bread shortages aren't affecting us. They use this to further just push her down and hate her and spread these lies and spread rumors and, take away her power, basically. But I do want to push that there is no proof that she said this. It is an alleged statement. It is also one of the reasons why she's famous. A lot of people will think of this supposed quote she said if you bring up Marie Antoinette. I know personally in a few of the TV shows or movies I've seen, there are references back to this, and this quote, "Let them eat cake," or this Marie Antoinette didn't care for her people or didn't care what they were going through. There's no proof she said this, so it is kind of a take it with a grain of salt sort of thing. But that is why, one of the reasons why many people know her name is because of this alleged quote. After she said this, the people didn't like her. And this affair of the diamond necklace made them not like her even more. It is a very intense story that just further tarnished her name, and people really did not like her after this. This very expensive necklace, this photo is the necklace that I will be talking about. You can see it is, a large piece of jewelry, and photos don't do justice to the beauty and just the insane amount of work that has clearly gone into making this. But today it's worth multi-million dollars. So back, in the 1700s, it did cost a lot of money that common folk did not have, especially since this country was struggling so deeply with economic problems and money and financial situations. So it was very expensive. You can even see from the photos, it looks expensive, but all of those little sparkles and tiny little dots are diamonds. It was hundreds of carats of diamonds in this necklace. So it was worth millions. The jeweler who made this necklace tried to sell it to Marie Antoinette, but she refused to buy it. Some think she refused to buy it because people already thought she was spending the country's money on herself, and if they see her walking around with this very, very expensive necklace, they may further question her spending habits. So she refused. They tried a few more times to get her to buy this necklace. She continued to refuse. So there was a very intentional plan made up to get her to supposedly buy it. One of the cardinals, his name is Cardinal de Rohan, had a mistress, Comtesse de la Mate. She convinced the jewelers that Marie Antoinette was going to buy this necklace, but she was not going to buy it directly. She convinced them Marie Antoinette was going to buy the necklace using Rohan as kind of the messenger, you could say. Rohan was very gullible and very easily manipulated and very easily convinced that he was going to buy this necklace. She was his mistress, and he trusted her and was very easily convinced. So he went and bought the necklace. He wanted to mend a broken relationship that had happened between him and the queen. And so he did this for her. He was going to buy the necklace, bring it to Mate, and she would bring it to the queen. She had the whole plan worked up. She knew she was not going to bring it to the queen. He did not know that. He trusted her. He was very gullible. So he went and bought the necklace. Rohan paid for the necklace. He bought it. He was going to pay for it in kind of installments, kind of monthly payments. So he paid the first payment off. The jeweler gave him the necklace. He brought it to Mate to give to Marie Antoinette, but she kept it. After he had left, he thought all was well, and he did a great thing, and he was going to mend this relationship. She broke it up into pieces. She knew this necklace had hundreds of carats of diamonds in it, and she needed money, and she wanted money, and she was very, very greedy. She broke up this necklace, sold it for pieces and parts, and profited immensely off of this. The jewelers had no care in the world. They were happy to get this expensive piece of jewelry off their hands and make their money. Rohan was confused when he never saw Marie Antoinette wear it. The queen had no idea what was going on and that this scheme was going on. All she knew was she did not want to buy the necklace. When the jewelers came back for another payment, she found out the whole plan. She found out, Rohan bought the necklace, promised these people he would pay for it or she would pay for it, and all the jewelers wanted was their money. They, had no part in this great scheme to get Mate this money, get her the necklace, let her break it up. And the queen was angry, and rightfully so. Her name was further dragged through the mud. Rohan was confused and very angry and upset that the queen wasn't wearing his necklace. And during, this trial, and while, the public was made aware of this, because rumor and news spread like wildfire, because the people already did not like the queen, and they already believed, she was spending their money and to buy her crazy fancy outfits. And so they did not believe Marie Antoinette when she said she had no part in this. They did not believe that Rohan and Mate were doing this. Rohan was gullible. He didn't really know what was going on either. But the people did not believe Marie Antoinette. And so after they found out that, this necklace had been broken up and sold, they did not like Marie Antoinette. They further hated her and further ruined her name. And, this just made the peasants and the common folk even more upset that the queen was living lavishly and buying all these things rather than helping them out. After a while, the Bastille was invaded, and even after that, the queen, people hated her. People were spreading rumors, and this is when the pamphlets and the rumors really started to pick up. After the diamond necklace affair, things started to pick up. People hated her. People did anything and everything they could to make their friends, family, and neighbors hate her. She left the country. They fled. She was captured at first and eventually fled. People wanted to kill her, sending her death threats, spreading pamphlets of how they would kill her, spreading these rumors and getting their friends, family, and neighbors to believe the queen was worthy of death. She was captured and forced to go to Paris, and they thought that, if the king and queen live among the people, they will see what is going on and potentially help. They imprisoned her. She lived with the royal family in Paris until she fled. Her and her family tried to flee and go back. They wanted to leave, get out of Paris. And understandably so. She had been captured and taken there, with no free will of her own to choose to go or not go, so she fled. The family was captured only 2 days later after they fled. They were captured and further kept hostage and kept captive. Later, the French declare war on Austria, and this is a terrible turn of events because the marriage between Antoinette and Louis XVI was supposed to strengthen ties between France and Austria, and now there's a war going on between them. And this made the people incredibly suspicious. After Marie Antoinette had been captured and left, the family tried to flee, and now there is a war going on. The people did not like Marie Antoinette, and they were beginning to not like her husband either. So this is her actual trial here. I provided another timeline along the side that is a little bit more specific to her trial rather than the very general timeline I provided at the beginning. Some of the times and dates are still in that first timeline, but I just wanted a refresher here to just show, again, the events that led up to the day she was killed. So you'll see the March on Versailles happened in 1789, and then she was captured and fled Paris of 1791. So a couple years later, but still around the same time period. Almost, over a little bit over a year after they fled Paris is when France declares war on Austria. And then a couple months after France declared war on Austria, the king is killed. So you'll see he's killed in 1793. But January, so a little bit earlier in the year. That same year that her husband is killed, Marie Antoinette's trial will begin. There's one big thing I want to point out here, and that is her trial began October 13th of 1793, and she was killed on October 16th of 1793. So her trial was very short-lived, which did not give her or the people on her side of the story a lot of time to prepare and, recognize, even process what was happening. That's a very, very short trial for an accusation as large as treason. You'll see at the top of the screen that is what she was accused of, was treason. Just, a little reminder that Marie Antoinette is Austrian, and she was Austrian, at heart, and that is where she was from. So when France declared war on Austria, the people believed Marie Antoinette had some role in that. They, thought maybe she was providing information to the Austrians, since the marriage between Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette was supposed to strengthen this alliance between the French and the Austrian. They thought maybe since there's a war going on, Marie Antoinette would have to choose between her home at heart and her home in, the flesh. She lived in Versailles. She was, living in France. She married into the French, but she was from Austria in the Holy Roman Empire, and that's where her, her family was. And so the people thought she was, giving away valuable information or providing the Austrian with some kind of information that would aid them in beating the French. The people already did not like her, so there was not a ton of evidence that they were using against her here. A lot of it was opinion, and a lot of it was spread through, rumors and telling, he said, she said sort of thing. One of the other things that she was accused of was incest with her 10-year-old son. This accusation was very far-fetched because the people saw how proud she was to be a mother and how in love with her children she was. They knew Marie Antoinette's heart, and I think even though they hated her, that is such a bold accusation and such a dangerous accusation that they, eventually dropped those charges just because they knew Marie Antoinette did not have the heart to do that to her own children. She loved her children so dearly, and she was so just in awe of how wonderful her children were. And so to make her own 10-year-old son testify against his mother through, imprisonment and torture, and they just flooded his mind with these thoughts and ideas. And that's where he died. Her 10-year-old son passed away in that prison from tuberculosis. But those charges were dropped. That is just the people knew Marie Antoinette could not do that to her child, just because of how proud they saw her be as a mom. They did accuse her of treason, and they held strong to that accusation. So this, next point, this her hair turned white point, allegedly overnight, due to the stress and the anxiety of this trial, caused her hair to turn white. Today, people call this Marie Antoinette syndrome. It's just this modern, slang sort of term for what happens when someone's hair turns white very rapidly, seemingly overnight. Before she was killed, they did mess with her hair just because they knew it meant something to her. So you'll see in this, top photo, her hair does look fairly short, whether that be pulled back into like a low bun or it was really cut. They did mess with her hair, cut it. They did not let her put it up or do her fancy hairstyles prior to them killing her, just to try to take away her pride. And they just tried to humiliate her in any way possible. So her hair turning white and then them messing with it was just their way of trying to push her farther and farther down. You'll see my note here, though, that she stayed honorable. The biggest thing that, Marie Antoinette did was not fight it. She never fought back. She never was angry, even. She knew the inevitable. Her trial was so short. There was really nothing she could have done or would have done that would change the outcome of this trial. The people were so against her. She knew nothing she did or said would change this inevitable outcome of her death. She never fought it. She held herself with this honor and respect. You'll see in that top photo I pointed out not too long ago. She held her head high. She would often look among the crowd and, really let them see her face and let them remember her in a proud but yet very humble way. She was very powerful. In the very beginning of my presentation here, I discussed, she was strong-spoken and very, very powerful, and she held that to the very end of her life. She got up in front of all of these people, who were accusing her of these things, who were spreading rumors and lies and bullying her and tearing her down, just one blow after one blow, cutting her hair, messing with her hair, turning her child against her, accusing her of all of these things, treason, incest, spreading rumors about her, sleeping with her brother-in-laws. She stayed strong. She was very, very powerful and showed that all the way up until her death. She held herself with such an honor, and she respected herself enough to not let herself fight back or argue. There's one account where she accidentally tripped on one of these guillotine guards' foot. She tripped or stepped on his toe or smeared his shoe, and the account says she apologized. She held herself so honorable and respectful. She apologized to a guard that would be killing her in just a few minutes. She was so humble, and she held herself proudly. I don't think there are very many of us that would apologize to someone who is about to murder us for simply stubbing their toe, tripping on them, bumping into their foot. Personally, I know I could never do that. I don't even want to imagine it, but I know in that moment, I'm sure there were so many emotions rushing through her, and she still was calm and respectful enough to apologize. And then not too long after that was she killed by the guillotine. You'll see in this bottom photo, it is a little bit hard to see, but I think it is a good representation of probably what had happened. She was so hated by her people, and you can see in that photo they look so thrilled that she is now gone, and that guard, potentially the one she stepped on and apologized to, is now holding her head high and proud that he just murdered her. She was beheaded by the guillotine, and for treason. That is her ultimate fate. On October 16th, 1793, after a very short-lived, very eventful life, was she killed. They buried her in an unmarked grave, so they didn't even honor her in the way many kings and queens and royalty or government, high officials were, in big extravagant graves and memorials and tombstones and things. She was buried in an unmarked grave. They put her head on a stick and paraded around. The people were so excited that she was finally gone. They thought she was such a horrible woman that deserved this tragic death, but like I said, she carried herself proudly. And I think that is also one of the reasons why, she should be remembered. She should not be remembered as a terrible woman, but I think she should be remembered. These people hated her, but I think one of the reasons she's famous is because of this high honor and yet humbleness she carried herself with always. These are just, this is my works cited slide. Some of these, my favorite one out of all of these was the fourth one down, G.P. Gooch, the Marie Antoinette. That is where I got a ton of my information, and I will honestly say I read that one many, many times because of just the depth, and the language they used was very pleasant and easy to understand. So all of these are great reads, but I would suggest reading that one anytime you can. I also have a photos cited slide just because I wanted it a little bit more organized. But all of the photos I used, I think, very accurately represent Marie Antoinette from her, as a child. Her clothing was still high-end, but once she became the Queen of France, her clothing became spectacular and incredibly fancy, and she lived very lavishly and was very powerful. You can even see that, through her clothing. She was a very powerful woman, and the photos before she was killed show just this honor that she held herself with. And I think Marie Antoinette deserves to be remembered as a powerful woman, but we all make mistakes, and there are some clear mistakes she made in her life, but I do think she should be remembered, for the power that she had and just the respect she had for herself. She was a very wonderful woman who died too young and deserves to be remembered. Thank you.